We help people who have been diagnosed with Lyme disease or people who are searching for a diagnosis because their tests are negative or everything's normal and no one can figure them out, and despite going to, 30 different specialists and other kinds of practitioners. Our big idea is that we're in a research facility and we're using an experimental advanced medical scan to scan for over 1,000 different signatures, they call electrical frequencies, of infections, toxins, inflammation, neurotransmitters. It's kind of like the Star Trek medical scanner. It's like an early version of that technology. It kind of fits with my background. Used to work at NASA doing robotics and space station development and working with astronauts. So that's my big idea.
Hi friends, welcome to the New Normal Big Life podcast. We bring you natural and integrative health information and stories about nature that we hope will inspire you to get outside and adventure, along with a step-by-step plan to help you practice what you've learned, create your own new normal, and live the biggest life you can dream. I'm your host, Antoinette Lee, the Wellness Warrior. Let's get into today's topic. Welcome, Greg Lee, to New Normal Big Life. Why don't you tell us who you are, what you do, and the one big idea you want to leave listeners with today from the expertise you plan to share?
We help people who have been diagnosed with Lyme disease or people who are searching for a diagnosis because their tests are negative or everything's normal and no one can figure them out, and despite going to, 30 different specialists and other kinds of practitioners. Our big idea is that we're in a research facility here and we're using an experimental advanced medical scan to scan for over 1,000 different signatures, they call electrical frequencies, of infections, toxins, inflammation, neurotransmitters. It's kind of like I grew up watching Star Trek. So it's kind of like the Star Trek medical scanner. It's like an early version of that. We haven't quite got to the Star Trek level of technology. And, it kind of fits with my background. Used to work at NASA doing robotics and space station development and working with astronauts. So yeah, that's my big idea.
That's incredible. I cannot wait to dive in. So can you tell us about the machine? Does it scan your body from head to toe with sort of a light frequency, or is it an electrical frequency?
It's electrical frequencies, and basically it does it through the hand. And you
Wow.
have it be able to receive the frequency and then read the response back. And it measures the electrical potential across the hand and how that shifts with the input frequency set. The theory is every organ has a certain frequency that it resonates at, and that other things like pathogens also resonate at their own frequency. And so there's different scanners that are provided by the company that enable you to say, okay, this is what we're going to catalog as the liver frequency, or this is the blood frequency, or the basal ganglia frequency in your brain. And then being able to say, when you check out that frequency, how normal is it? How much is it off by a standard deviation? And then based on that, that helps us to see what correlates with that. Is there potentially infection like Lyme disease, or is there toxins from mold, or is there coming up from the gut from what's called leaky gut? And that's kind of wandering into the brain, causing problems. So it's really doing a very detailed systems analysis of the patient using the system to see what we can find that there perhaps other testing has missed or wasn't sensitive enough to detect.
And how does that correlate to a blood test or a urine test or a stool sample, for example?
So with blood tests, urine tests, stool tests, you're using usually antibody detection and blood tests, or you're using antigen detection based upon whatever testing method that they're using. And usually it's some sort of like chemical reaction. It's not an electrical, it's more like a physical interaction that you're detecting with those other tests. And this is using more like what you would have in electricity. Since there's very little resistance in the body, you can get electricity to travel throughout the body very quickly and pick up what may be disharmonies in different frequencies.
That sounds so incredibly amazing. I would love to try it out. If I'm ever in your neck of the woods, I'm going to stop by. That Sounds incredible. I find that the best innovators are those that solve a problem for others that they wish they had answers to when they were going through their own challenge. Can you share with us your health crisis and how it pushed you to leave robotics engineering and go into natural medicine?
When I was working at NASA, I was a manager in a robotics lab, and I began to get gut pain and also bloating, and had to go to the bathroom all of a sudden. And I thought it would go away. I was working out, I was very healthy, but it didn't, and it kept getting worse. I went to the doctor, and he goes, "Oh, you got irritable bowel syndrome, and here, take this medication." And I took the medication, and it gave me really bad, like, brain fog. I can't work. I can't think. I'm starting to freak out here. And I fell behind on projects. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm up the creek without a paddle. And it was like the lowest point of my life. I had anxiety, insomnia, and I was just losing hope that I'd ever get better. Fortunately, a colleague of mine suggested, why don't you try acupuncture? And I had this crazy uncle. He used to work for what used to be this before that was CIA, it was OSS, and he had arthritis, and he would take bees and sting himself in his arthritis. And I'm like, you are nuts, man. What are you doing? I mean, I was a young kid at the time when he was doing it. Then I was like, okay, now I have my own health challenges. I'm not necessarily going to go to bee stinging, but I'm going to go to acupuncture and do that. And hopefully that'll help me to feel better. And so that was part of my inspiration to go for it. And so I went to the acupuncturist, and she goes, how's your diet? Talked to her, oh yeah, highly processed foods and a lot of sugar and gluten and a lot of inflammatory foods. And she's kind of looks at me without a lot of judgment. And goes, well, those things can make your irritable bowel worse. So why don't you try reducing that and trying these non-inflammatory foods? Okay, great. And changed my diet, got acupuncture, and also took remedies. And within several months, most of my symptoms were much better. And I was like, woohoo, thanks, back to work. Then a year later, they started to come back. And I was like,
Mm.
no, no. And I didn't want to go through that again. So I knew I needed to make a change. And because somehow I had a really sensitive gut, or put stress in there, or whatever the explanation was. And it hit me to go help other people to heal like my acupuncturist helped me. So I went into acupuncture school, and my colleagues at NASA thought I was nuts. A couple of them said, I wish I had the courage to do what you're doing. Otherwise, it was a wild, what are you doing?
Wow, that's an incredible journey. And, I have a interesting story. I'm a traumatic brain injury survivor, and I had been to 5 or 6 neurologists, maybe even more. I was getting ocular migraines, which meant I would lose my vision in addition to traditional migraines, which were painful. So I had 2 migraines at the same time,
Wow.
and I would get rebound migraines. So
Hmm?
as one migraine was tapering off, another would start. And I had traditional and ocular migraines for 28 consecutive days without ending.
Wow.
And I tried every therapy, including the IV drug cocktail that you go in every day and
Mhm.
4 hours on an IV drip, and I was terribly ill, and the migraines never went away. And then they said, "Well, the next thing we can do is put you into a coma," I think for 3 days, a drug-induced coma, "and maybe they will go away, but you might lose more of your memory," which is not something a TBI survivor wants to hear, "and it may not work." So I said, "Let's pump the brakes," and I went home and just started Googling and found a doctor's office. He was an MD. He became an acupuncturist, and he was talking about how he's been very successful at eliminating migraines. I went to see him. He put one needle in the center of my forehead, right between my eyes. The migraine went away, and that was it. And I've been hooked on acupuncture ever since. It was so incredible. I was on 2 migraine medicines, 1 migraine medicine to prevent it and 2 to treat it. And then the third option always landed me in the emergency room. And it really gave me my life back to have control over migraines. And, like many of my listeners, you will go in and you get all of these tests, and doctors will say, your lab work is fine. I don't know what we can do from here. I don't have any other options for you. Yet you still feel sick and exhausted, and your brain is foggy, and you don't live a fulfilling life. How does your Goodbye Lyme system and advanced scanning help with this to uncover the root cause?
A lot of patients are in that situation in that their tests are normal and they're practitioners or specialists. I think my record is 48 different doctors or specialists that one patient went to. So they're good practitioners. Maybe their testing isn't as accurate as it needs to be, because some of the conference presentations I've been to, they say the standard tests are about 50% accurate. So you flip a coin, basically. And that's about the kind of accuracy you're going to get. Unfortunately, many patients have all the symptoms, or maybe their immune system isn't producing enough antibodies, or there's multiple strains of Lyme disease. And maybe they have a strain that doesn't produce the antibodies that they're looking for on the test, but they produce the symptoms also. Also, we see that ticks carry over 80 different infections. And so what happens is people get not just Lyme, they might get a protozoa called Babesia, which is like malaria, or they get a bacteria called Bartonella, which can produce very similar symptoms, but give you a negative Lyme test. And some of the testing for these, what they call co-infections, is less accurate than the testing for Lyme, according to the different conferences that I've been at in the presentations. So there's a lot of, you clinically present this way, so we're going to treat you this way, with my physician colleagues who treat Lyme. And when it comes to the point where then you do a lot of antibiotics or antimicrobials, you get die-off. You get the release of a lot of toxins and inflammation, and that flares up people's symptoms in terms of their brain fog, their fatigue, their joint pain, their neurological tremors, and it's all different kinds depending on the patient. And so a lot of them, people who come to us say, I can't take the die-off reaction, what they call the Herxheimer reaction, and it's too much. Can you help me and not put me in a bad Herxheimer reaction? And so I'm like, yes, we can specialize in helping open up the detox pathways in patients, so that when you do start killing stuff off, it gets out of you and doesn't just get recirculate and make you sicker.
What are those detox pathways?
The lymphatic, the liver, the skin, the intestines, those are the main ones that get congested in some infections like Bartonella, another one like brucellosis, some like the lymphatic system. So it gets really thick and coagulated. Instead of washing stuff out, things just get stuck in there. And so what happens is that patients have all this swelling, or one of the signature symptoms you get with Bartonella is you get the swelling in the hands and feet. And it gets neuropathy, or like brucellosis, you have sweats that smell like wet hay. But if we have patients that have never been to a farm or whatever, and like the wife goes, he smells like a fresh cut grass field, and with Lyme, like one of the signature symptoms is migrating nerve pain. So like a hot line of pain, and then all of a sudden it goes over to the other shoulder or to the hip or the brain. So there's other very rare conditions that can cause it, but the most common underlying thing that we see in these migrating nerve patients is a Lyme infection or Borrelia infection.
It sounds like Lyme can mimic a lot of other things, and it can also exasperate things like maybe you might develop lymphedema as a result of that chronic widespread inflammation. So you talk about combining traditional Chinese medicine with electrical frequency and herbal treatments. What are the beneficial mechanisms of each, and how do you decide what would benefit a patient more?
So in the advanced scan that we do, we look for not only what are the infections, but what is also blocked. So if the lymphatic system is congested and blocked, then we can also test in the scan what remedies like essential oils, herbals, supplements, or homeopathics can help increase lymphatic flow. So there's one called Eucalyptus globulus, which is an essential oil. And when you mix it with a carrier oil and apply it, very low dilution, that really helps dissolve the congestion in the lymphatic system. And the problem is that if you do it too much, then you have this big dump that happens and the person has a flare up of their symptoms. So you have to be very cautious depending on the patient, how toxic they are, how congested they are, and what dose they can handle, eliminate without really flaring up their, symptoms.
And are these essential oils applied topically? Is it in an oil carrier like grapeseed oil or something?
So we have 10 different ways we have patients take essential oils. Yeah. They can
Wow.
diffuse it in a diffuser. They can do it topically with a carrier oil, like you said. There's like lots of different carrier oils. And even the carrier oils like coconut oil, olive oil, or avocado oil have their own healing properties in terms of lowering inflammation or promoting circulation and things like that, or cooling the body because some of the infections make people really have a lot of heat symptoms. So it's really like looking at, okay, what is the best combination that will help this patient with their, not only their symptoms, but also addressing the underlying core issues, infections, toxins, inflammation, immune reactions. And so that's what we're researching and determining how can we use this system, because we've seen over 1,000 patients and no two patients are alike. Even though they have a Lyme infection, one has Epstein-Barr, the other one has roundworm parasites, or another one has Clostridia bacterial infection in their gut, or mold in their like skin. So knowing that level of information, then we can be very much more targeted. So then we use something called frequency specific microcurrent, or the electrical frequencies that we can use to target infections, detox, lower inflammation, accelerate healing, and also unblock things like scar tissue. It's based upon,
Wow.
you have these two frequencies. One is a healing frequency that says inhibit Borrelia or detox bacterial toxins or lower inflammation. And then you have a targeting frequency or a tissue frequency. I was presenting at a conference in Texas over a decade ago, and this radiologist was also presenting, and he says, here's this image of the brain, and here you can see this part of the brain is inflamed. Now I'm applying the anti-inflammatory frequency for that person's part of the brain, and it shrink within seconds. And I went, I need that. Give me that, man. Or just tell me how you way to do all this stuff. Because yeah. And so then we've been using that for over a decade, and it has been a game changer for people with chronic inflammatory conditions, have stuff for traumatic brain injury and concussion healing. In fact, I'm doing
Wow.
a series for medical providers called the Brain Restoration Series, where I actually have medical providers come in, and based upon what they're looking for, what kind of patients they're seeing, they can try to get microcurrent therapy for concussion, traumatic brain injury healing. Or another therapy, what we use for patients, is molecular hydrogen therapy. This is used throughout China. It's used in Europe. It was very effective when you had patients in the COVID hospitals in China. They have videos of these patients. They're on a ventilator and they can't even talk. And then they're getting this inhaled hydrogen. And hours later, they can talk, they can speak, because it cuts the inflammation down so quickly. So this is my therapy I use on a daily basis to help clean out my nervous system, lower inflammation. Plus, in animal studies, it shrinks cancer tumors. So it's like my anti-cancer, protect my, immune system. And it is also like been huge with chronic brain fog, chronic inflammatory meningitis, or other lymphatic inflammation. You can inhale it, you can drink it in water, you can apply it topically on pain syndromes. And that has been with patients that have tried everything for their pain. And that has been one of the things that has been a breakthrough that has far surpassed other treatments.
Before we cover the next topic in this episode, I want to introduce you to the adventure sports lifestyle with a micro story about an adventure that I've had. The adventure sports lifestyle and my deep connection to nature is essential to my good health, so here's the story. I love getting on my paddleboard and paddling around a lake, but for most people, standing up on a paddleboard is very difficult. There's a secret technique to it. In a future episode of New Normal Big Life, I will show you how to stand up on a paddleboard and go. But one day, I decided to take my paddleboard off the lake, the calm water, and put it on moving water. And I got out on the river, paddled from the eddy, the calm water, into the main current. And it was such an incredible feeling to be going fast on moving water. I did that. I hope this inspires you to get outside on an adventure with friends, family, and the people you love most, and to watch my video on how to stand up on your paddleboard and other paddleboarding techniques. And so, for our patients around the country and even our international listeners, how do they access your testing protocol and treatments?
So you go to lymeresearchcenter.com and look us up, and you can contact us. Happy to talk with you about this. We do on our intakes, every new patient gets an advanced scan, and it takes like 2 hours. And we're looking at not only infections, we're looking at functional medicine, we're looking at Chinese medicine, looking at genetic mutations that may block detoxification. And so we're looking at a lot of different things. So if we find something like, oh, you have like this one woman, she had been struggling with gut issues for over a decade, and so we were scanning her, and so in the middle of the scan, go like, we're picking up a parasite in your intestines that's probably been about there for about 20 years, and her eyes go really wide, like, "Boing," and she goes like, I got food poisoning in Jamaica on my honeymoon, and when we looked at the parasite, it was a Giardia, it's a protozoa. Oh yeah, that's found in Jamaica. Yeah, so that's probably when you picked it up. And so whenever she would eat dairy, she would vomit violently and have be out of commission for 2 days. And if it was like even a little bit of dairy, she'd have this huge reaction. So what we found was she had this autoimmune reaction in her gut. And so what we did was we said, okay, we need to not only treat the parasite with any protozoal essential oils, herbs, homeopathics, but also we need to calm the autoimmune reaction in your gut because it's causing this huge reaction. And so what we did was there's different supplements that calm that. In Chinese medicine, there's a different strategy when you have a like overactive immune system. They regulate the immune system versus like in Western medicine, you have more like immunosuppression, which is more like a blanket everything. But this is more like targeted and helps increase the immune system where it needs to be increased and also pulls it back when it's over producing inflammation or over attacking its own tissues, like in the intestines. And about 3 to 4 months after we started treating her and she got treatments, and we also did microcurrent for her gut for lowering inflammation. And that has been a game changer for like in studies, they show like with animal studies, they do something to mice and they get them all inflamed and they measure the level of inflammation of like compounds like interleukins and tumor necrosis factor alpha. Then they test them after they get the microcurrent treatment, and they show within minutes, like 3 to 4 minutes, 40 to 60% reduction in inflammation. And they've also
Wow.
done studies on post exercise, PTSD, war veterans, on how it really lowers inflammation, promotes healing, helps clear trauma, things like that.
This is absolutely incredible.
As imagine that you've seen and having, TBI, hydrogen is also very helpful for lowering brain inflammation, the microcurrent. There's also a recent study where they did it, exposed primates to a 40 hertz sound, and that had them dump out beta amyloid and other toxic proteins out of their brain at much greater level. And this is just listening an hour a day to this frequency. When I started doing it, I was like, whoa, stuff is like draining out of my head. And I'm just listening to this sound that's like a low hum. And I'm like, whoa, this is wild. And other local practitioner, he works with elder population and he goes, I'm having trouble sleeping. And so he did the sound thing. And afterwards, he emailed me, man, I had the best sleep after that treatment. So we look at a lot because we have a lot of neurological infection patients that we need to get their brain cleaned out. There's a clinical neuroscientist that's right next door here, and I'm partnering with her on doing EEG measurements of brain waves to see how these treatments are helping the brain to heal more quickly and how we can measure that and maybe do study and publish that. So, I mean, she's used to work with Alzheimer's and also neurological illness patients in her PhD thesis.
Wow, these therapies are really tackling some of the biggest health challenges that we're seeing, not just in the United States, but globally. This is just such incredible news, and I'm going to have to make a special trip to come visit
Oh,
so that
great.
I can take advantage of both the testing and the treatments.
Yeah. Come on in. We'd love to have you.
Thank you. So, what role does mindset, emotions, your inner talk play in recovering and also managing long term illness?
Oh, it's huge. And I used to work for a consulting firm called Lionheart, and we would do executive coaching with some of the top Fortune 100 companies. And what we found in working with them is underneath they operated their kind of like belief system. And then underneath, there's this untrue belief system, which kind of like sabotages them. We used to do CEO roundtables. And what happens is that they're often very high functioning, but they often have a very strong ego. And, there's like different dynamics. When you get an executive group together, you have one person who may be more the dominant one, but then you have one that's more the passive one. And when you look at it energetically, they're the two poles in the energy of the group. And by getting those two poles to talk and interact in a certain way, it actually shifts the energy of the group. Instead of sitting in that resentment, it's like bringing that out in a way which isn't about, which is more about healing and connecting and coming to what's our shared mission here, talking the coaching talk. What is our higher purpose? What are we really here to achieve? And how does what we're doing serve that? And having that conversation takes it away from making the person right or wrong or all that. But it's more like, is this really in service? And getting people to really look at it from a much higher perspective, as opposed to this is what I want and I'm going to get it no matter what you think, kind of thing. So it's working with those kind of dynamics, which was really enlightening for me because I used to working things more on a one-on-one level energetically, but then doing this with these, really high functioning people, but helping them to see I do have these internal beliefs that in order to succeed, I need to push forward my agenda no matter what, or I can never succeed because of I'm not smart enough, just these kind of ideas that would surface in these coaching sessions with these executives one-on-one and also in the retreats that we put them on too.
Yeah, limiting beliefs can keep you stuck. And so, for a person who's dealing with chronic illness, if they have a limiting belief that I have X diagnosis, my doctor tells me that you can't cure it, all that you can do is manage it. And this is my life, and my life will always be this way, and I just have to deal with it. And then from there, you can start thinking small, and your life gets smaller and smaller until you barely existing. You almost feel invisible as a person. And I really know what that's like because a brain injury can make you go inward, especially when I was really struggling with word recall and remembering things. So like this conversation would have been impossible and it makes your life very small. That's why here on New Normal Big Life, I encourage people to dream big, to create their new normal after an illness, an injury, or big life change, and think of the biggest life you can envision. And chances are, if you're anything like me, the big life you thought will get even bigger once you put intention and attention and action into play. So, for someone who's listening and feeling overwhelmed by all of their health challenges, what are a few practical steps they can take today to start their healing journey?
Well, going back to the model of the belief system, one of the tools that that I use with patients, but also in the executives, is we would take them through a process where they would take a situation where they feel like either they're not healthy or they're not able to perform. Like I had one manager. He worked for this huge real estate development. He had also had Lyme disease too. And he talked about how he'd go to sites and his brain was so foggy, he couldn't remember different things on the job and all this stuff. And so I started working with him and started getting his information in his brain down and clearing out the pain and other syndromes in his body. And he got to a point about 3 months into treatment where he said, can you help me with something? I haven't talked to you about this yet. And I said, well, what is it? I'm crying all the time and I can't stop. For a man in the construction industry, that's probably not a very, appreciative behavior. So, he drove the H2 Hummer. He had arms that were as big as my head. I mean, this guy was like the man. And here he's out of control. I can't control my emotions. And so we talked about the situation when it comes up. It's like I'm out there or I'll see a a dog and I think it's lost. And all of a sudden I'll just start crying and I can't stop, And I was like, yeah, it was very tender, but, not construction appreciative. And so I said, okay, so what's the emotion around that? And he says, well, I'm really afraid that I'm just losing it. I'm just going to go nuts because I can't control myself. And I said, okay, so that's kind of like the what's going on at the situation level, the conscious level. And then I said, okay, so when you feel that way, what do you want that you're not getting? Well, I want control. I don't want to have this stuff just all of a sudden hit me and feel like I'm powerless. And I said, okay, so when people talk, they use certain words that kind of light up. Working with coaching, you kind of go, yep, okay, there's gold there, there's energy there, there's emotion there. So, okay, when you're powerless, what does that lead you to believe? And just kind of struggling with going in and feeling it and not wanting to, but wanting to at the same time. And then he goes, I really feel like there's all this healing for other people, but I'm not getting it because God is not gonna heal me. And at that point, he broke down, the huge relief, because that was really painful. Like, oh, God's not gonna heal you. You're screwed, right? And so I'm letting him let that out because that's part of the letting that energy, that emotion that he's held in there on a not really a conscious level, but now it brought up the consciousness. We can work with that. So I said, okay, how does that feel to you? And I feel it feels terrible. So I gave my wisest sage voice. Sounds like crap, feels like crap, must be crap. And he goes, but what do I do with it? I say, well, you need a second opinion. So what do you call the highest source of wisdom? What do you call the higher source of truth? He goes, well, God. And I said, okay, so feel that place in you that feels like you're not going to get healed by God, and ask God, is that really true? That you are not going to get healed, and so he's sitting there quietly repeating himself, God, 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 and his face starts to soften. And about a couple minutes later, he kind of looks weird and disoriented and confused. And he goes, I got the insight that there's enough healing for everybody and it's okay for me to receive. And that was huge. And it totally shifted the tears and stuff. So when he came up with like, oh, I'm hitting more of those tears, instead of going into like trying to control it and clamp down on it, he go like, okay, God, 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 what is that showing me about, is there another part of me that doesn't believe something or feels like it's not going to get healing or whatever that is? And when he did that, it was huge for not only his ability to function as a manager in this huge real estate development company, but also for his healing. And, he was just transformed dramatically after that.
Wow, that is such an incredibly insightful story. Thank you for sharing it with us. What more do you want to leave listeners with now?
Well, I don't know. That's pretty good, huh? I'm going to leave on a winning note, right? So find us on the web at lymeresearchcenter.com. And we also are openings. We're taking new patients with chronic illnesses, infections, or no one can figure you out. We see a lot of those kind of patients we have a top medical institution in the country that's like less than an hour from us. And we get patients that have been there over a decade. No one can figure them out, tests or multiple diagnoses. And with the scan, we find things like sinus infections, tick-borne infections, gut. It's not really on their radar to look at things like, say, from functional medicine or Chinese medicine or that. And by doing that, we help these patients who've been struggling for years or decades to start to get better. And within 4 months, this one man goes, you saved my life. I thought I was just done. And I'm taking my wife on a vacation to Alaska.
Oh, that's beautiful. Wow. Thank you so much for joining us today, Greg Lee. This has been such an amazing journey. Thank you so much for being a healer with a heart, and it really comes through.
Aw, well, thank you. It's been a blast. I really enjoy your energy and your joy. And this has been wonderful.
Thank you. I feel the same.
The information in this podcast is not medical advice and should not be treated as such. Always consult your physician or healthcare professional before pursuing any health-related procedure or activity.